Our peaceful morning in one of Dubai's most luxurious neighborhoods was interrupted by the blaring sound of police sirens. At Villa 42 in Emirates Hills, police and emergency vehicles swarmed the scene, their lights bouncing off the pristine walls of multi-million-dollar mansions. Something serious had happened, and it wasn't going unnoticed. Inside the grand villa, officers discovered James Mitchell, a well-known international banker, lying dead in his office. His wife, Sarah Mitchell, wasn't hiding or denying anything. She sat calmly in the living room, waiting for the police. There were no tears, no frantic calls for help, just a quiet, unsettling composure. By the next morning, the news had spread like wildfire. Headlines painted a dramatic picture. A wife accused of murdering her husband in their lavish Dubai home. But as shocking as that was, the real story was far more complicated. Beneath the picture-perfect life the couple had displayed to the world lay a tangled mess of lies, betrayal, and secrets that spanned continents. This wasn't just about one shocking crime. What would follow in the coming days would expose a hidden life, unravel a carefully crafted image of wealth and happiness, and reveal truths no one saw coming. The perfect facade was crumbling, and the world was about to learn just how deep the cracks went. Sarah Mitchell's life seemed like the definition of success. Born in London to a school teacher and a librarian, she worked hard from a young age to achieve more than what her modest upbringing could offer. After excelling at a top school, she went on to graduate from the London School of Economics with honors. By her mid-twenties, she had already made a name for herself in the competitive world of investment banking. James Mitchell's story wasn't much different. A respected figure in international banking, he climbed the ranks at HSBC, known for his sharp mind and ability to close high-stakes deals. When Sarah and James crossed paths at a global finance conference, it seemed like destiny. Two ambitious professionals at the top of their game, drawn together by mutual admiration and shared dreams. Their relationship moved fast, with whirlwind trips to exotic locations and a proposal straight out of a movie. Within months, they were married in a lavish ceremony in Dubai, surrounded by luxury and attended by hundreds of guests from around the world. Together, they became a power couple, the kind that people admired and envied in equal measure. Settling into life in Dubai, Sarah joined Goldman Sachs, while James took on a high-profile role at HSBC. They built a life most people could only dream of: an opulent villa, extravagant vacations, and a social calendar filled with elite events. From the outside, they had it all. But as we would soon learn, their perfect life was built on a foundation that was anything but solid. The cracks, though invisible at first, were already starting to show. From the outside, Sarah and James Mitchell seemed to live a life of absolute perfection. Their luxurious Dubai villa, worth millions, was not just a home, it was a statement. It hosted elegant dinner parties attended by Dubai's most influential figures. Their vacations were just as extravagant: weekend trips to Paris, private yachts in the Mediterranean, and stays in five-star resorts in the Maldives. Social media painted them as the ultimate couple. Posts of glamorous gala events, desert safaris in Range Rovers, and smiling snapshots with Dubai's elite filled their feeds. Friends couldn't help but comment on their chemistry, often describing them as inseparable. They seemed deeply in love, always laughing, always supportive of each other. Even the challenges they faced appeared to bring them closer. Their struggle with infertility, something they didn't share publicly, became a deeply personal journey. Sarah confided in close friends about how James had been her rock during their failed attempts at IVF. He seemed patient, understanding, and optimistic, a husband who stood by his wife no matter what. As their wealth grew, so did their investments. They weren't just a power couple in banking, they were building an empire. A penthouse in Dubai Marina, a ski chalet in Switzerland, and even a pied-à-terre in London's Mayfair, all signs of a life that seemed to be thriving. From every angle, their life appeared flawless, the kind of life most could only aspire to. But as perfect as it all seemed, there were things the photos didn't show and conversations that never made it to dinner tables. Behind the picture-perfect facade, a storm was brewing. It was only a matter of time before their carefully curated life began to crumble. The first signs that something wasn't right were so small they were easy to overlook. James' frequent business trips, a normal part of his high-powered banking career, started feeling different. They were longer, more frequent, and less predictable. His once consistent routine of video calls while traveling became sporadic. When questioned, he blamed poor internet connections, a strange excuse in the luxury hotels he often stayed at. Sarah noticed other subtle changes too. Small financial discrepancies began appearing, charges at restaurants on days he claimed to be in meetings, hotel bookings in cities he hadn't mentioned visiting. At first, she brushed it off as business-related expenses, but the irregularities kept piling up. Then there were the password changes. Shared accounts that had always been accessible to both of them suddenly became restricted, with James citing work security protocols as the reason. Even his demeanor started to shift. The man who used to share every detail of his day became vague and guarded. Conversations at dinner, once filled with laughter and connection, now felt strained. James was constantly distracted, checking his phone or stepping away to take calls. Friends began noticing too. He was no longer the engaging and present person they remembered at gatherings, often leaving early or appearing preoccupied. It wasn't just his behavior that raised alarms. There were also strange occurrences that Sarah couldn't ignore, calls that went silent when she picked up, late-night messages he dismissed as work emergencies, and missing documents from their carefully organized home office. As these moments added up, Sarah's unease turned into suspicion. Still, she told herself it might be nothing. It was easier to believe that stress or work was behind the changes than to confront what her instincts were telling her. But deep down, Sarah knew something was wrong, and the more she tried to ignore it, the more impossible it became to look away. When Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, she decided she needed answers. Ignoring her doubts had only made things worse. James had become a stranger in their own home, and the small inconsistencies in his stories now felt like glaring red flags. She knew she couldn't confront him without proof, so she made a decision that would change everything. She hired a private investigator. This wasn't an easy step for Sarah. She had spent years building a life with James, trusting him completely. But her growing anxiety left her no choice. Sitting in the office of Hassan al-Rashid, a retired Dubai police detective turned investigator, she laid out her concerns. Her voice trembled as she admitted what she feared. Her husband might be hiding something big. Hassan, who had seen countless cases like hers, assured Sarah that he would handle the situation discreetly. He assembled a team of experts, surveillance specialists, financial analysts, and digital forensics professionals. Their task was clear: track James' movements, dig into his finances, and uncover the truth. It didn't take long for the first clues to emerge. Hassan's team followed James after he left his office one evening. Instead of heading to the business dinner he had told Sarah about, his car veered off to a quiet street in Jumeirah. There, he parked outside a luxury apartment building and entered through a private entrance. Over the next few days, Similar patterns repeated visits to the same building, careful routes avoiding main roads, and always arriving with shopping bags from high-end stores. Hassan's investigation also revealed strange financial activity. Bank transfers to offshore accounts, purchases linked to a shell company, and lavish spending that didn't align with the life Sarah knew they were living. As the evidence piled up, it became clear that James wasn't just keeping secrets, he was living an entirely separate life. Sarah's worst fears were confirmed when Hassan laid out the photos and documents. The truth was even more shocking than she had imagined. James wasn't just lying to her, he had built a second life right under her nose. And now, there was no turning back. The perfect image she had worked so hard to protect was about to be shattered forever. The truth Hassan uncovered was devastating. James wasn't just hiding small secrets or indulging in occasional dishonesty. He was leading a completely separate life. For years, he had been married to another woman, Amora Callell, and together they had 3 children. The discovery left Sarah stunned. Everything she thought she knew about her husband unraveled in an instant. James's second wife, Amora, was no ordinary woman. She was a highly educated professional with deep roots in Dubai's elite circles. Born into a prominent merchant family, she had a PhD in chemical engineering and held a prestigious position at Dubai Science Park. Her family's influence and connections had even played a role in James' banking success, helping him establish key relationships in the region. James had carefully orchestrated his second life. He purchased a luxury apartment under a shell company, strategically located near Amora's family compound and their children's school. Photos from private social media accounts showed James in an entirely different world. He was a doting father, playing with his young children, attending family gatherings, and even participating in traditional Emirati celebrations. He had learned Arabic, embraced local customs, and appeared completely at ease in this other role. Sarah couldn't believe the extent of his deception. James's children with Amora, 2 3-year-old twins and a 1-year-old daughter, were a painful reminder of the life Sarah had dreamed of but never had. While she had undergone emotionally draining fertility treatments, James had built a family elsewhere, all while pretending to be the supportive husband. The details were meticulous and deliberate. James maintained separate email accounts, social media profiles, and even bank accounts to keep his 2 lives apart. His frequent business trips and long absences weren't for work at all, they were spent with his second family. To everyone around him, he was a devoted husband and father in 2 completely different worlds. For Sarah, the betrayal was unbearable. It wasn't just the lies or the secret family, it was the realization that the life they had built together was nothing more than a facade. James had mastered the art of living 2 lives, but now the walls between them were beginning to collapse. And Sarah was left standing in the wreckage, questioning everything. As Hassan's investigation dug deeper into James's finances, the scale of his deceit became even more staggering. James wasn't just hiding a second family. He was involved in elaborate financial schemes that extended far beyond what Sarah could have imagined. His reputation as a successful international banker wasn't built on hard work alone. It was propped up by a web of fraud, money laundering, and secret accounts. The first clue came from the apartment James had purchased for his second family. The property wasn't listed under his name, but was instead tied to a shell company called Desert Rose Holdings. Further investigation revealed that this wasn't James's only offshore entity. He had created multiple companies in places like the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and Cyprus to funnel money and hide assets. These companies were used to finance his dual lifestyle, covering everything from luxury cars to private school fees. What started as a way to support his second family soon revealed something far more sinister. James's account showed patterns of suspicious activity, large sums of money moving through multiple jurisdictions, often disappearing into untraceable investments. Transactions linked to his work at HSBC suggested he had been using his position to exploit loopholes in international banking laws. Millions of dollars had been siphoned through these channels, and some of the transfers bore signs of links to organized crime. For Sarah, each discovery felt like another betrayal. Their joint accounts, which she had always believed were carefully managed, were being drained. James had been quietly transferring assets into accounts she couldn't access, effectively cutting her out of their shared wealth. Properties she didn't even know existed were registered under aliases or fake companies. The more Hassan's team uncovered, the clearer it became that James' financial misconduct went beyond personal greed. He had been manipulating client accounts, diverting funds into his own schemes, and fabricating investment returns. These actions weren't just unethical, they were criminal. And with each revelation, Sarah realized she was married to a man whose lies weren't just personal, they were illegal on a global scale. The financial trail painted a damning picture of James's true character. He wasn't just a man with a secret family, he was a criminal hiding behind the polished image of a successful banker. For Sarah, the heartbreak of betrayal now carried an added weight, the fear of what James might be capable of if his secrets were ever exposed. And with every new piece of evidence, the life she thought she knew slipped further away. The weight of James' lies crushed Sarah, leaving her overwhelmed and spiraling into despair. Every piece of evidence Hassan uncovered added another layer to her grief. The husband she had trusted for years, the life they had built together, even the dreams they had shared, everything now felt like an elaborate illusion. She stopped sleeping, her mind racing with unanswered questions and worst-case scenarios. How long had this been going on? Had James ever truly loved her? What would happen if his crimes came to light, dragging her name and reputation into the scandal? The once organized and confident Sarah was now barely functioning. She avoided friends, skipped social engagements, and buried herself in the growing pile of evidence. Her home became a reflection of her mental state, chaotic and suffocating. The walls of the Home Office were soon covered with photos, financial statements, and notes, a desperate attempt to make sense of James' double life. Sarah spent hours poring over documents, connecting dots, and replaying the moments she now realized were lies. The dinners he missed, the calls he dismissed, the vague explanations, all of it suddenly made sense in the most devastating way. Her emotional health deteriorated quickly. Sarah's appetite disappeared, and she lost weight at an alarming rate. Panic attacks began to take hold, often triggered by small things: a ringing phone, a familiar song, even a comment from a concerned friend. Every reminder of James felt like a stab to the heart. The hardest blow was the discovery of his children with Amora. While Sarah had endured years of fertility treatments and heartbreak, James had secretly built the family she had always dreamed of. The pain of this betrayal was unbearable. It wasn't just the deception, it was the cruelty of watching her sacrifices mocked by the life he was living elsewhere. As the days passed, Sarah's grief began to shift into something darker. Anger replaced sadness, and the urge to confront James grew stronger with each new revelation. But Sarah wasn't just angry, she was calculating. Somewhere in the chaos of her emotions, a plan began to form. She couldn't let James continue to manipulate her life, her finances, and her future. What started as a desperate search for answers was quickly turning into something much more dangerous. Sarah's breakdown wasn't just an emotional collapse, it was the start of a transformation. The woman who had once trusted James implicitly was now preparing to take control of a situation that had spiraled beyond anything she could have imagined. She was no longer a victim of his lies. She was ready to take action. February 15th, 2024, started like any other day in Dubai's exclusive Emirates Hills community. The sun rose over manicured lawns and grand villas, and the neighborhood carried on as usual. But for Sarah Mitchell, this was not an ordinary day. It was the day she had decided to confront the man who had destroyed everything she believed in. Sarah's movements that morning were calculated. She left the villa early, as if heading to work, but instead drove to a nearby mall, parked her car, and took a taxi back home. By mid-morning, the household staff had been sent away under the pretense of needing privacy, leaving the villa eerily quiet. Sarah moved through her home with a determination that had replaced her earlier grief and confusion. She wasn't just planning to confront James, she was preparing for what might come next. Throughout the day, she made several trips to local stores, paying cash for the items she needed. Receipts later showed purchases of plastic sheeting, gloves, and other supplies. Back at the villa, she carefully set the stage, lining the walls of the home office and arranging the evidence she had collected about James's second life. Every document, every photo, every financial record was placed in plain view, ready for the confrontation. By the late afternoon, Sarah called James, her voice calm but firm. She told him she wasn't feeling well and asked him to come home early. James, distracted as always, agreed without much thought, saying he'd wrap up his meetings and head back soon. Hours later, he walked through the door of their villa, unaware of what awaited him. The house was unusually quiet when James arrived. The typical sounds of activity, the hum of the staff, the clatter of dishes were missing. He called out to Sarah, but there was no response. When he entered the home office, he found her sitting behind his desk, surrounded by the evidence of his lies. She didn't yell or accuse him. Instead, she simply said, "We need to talk." What happened next is pieced together from Sarah's confession and forensic evidence. The conversation quickly turned heated, with Sarah confronting James about Amora, the children, and his financial crimes. James, likely caught off guard, tried to deflect and deny, but Sarah had all the proof laid out in front of him. As his lies unraveled in real time, Sarah's anger reached a breaking point. The first gunshot was fired from across the room, hitting James in the chest. The second followed moments later, striking his head. The final shot, fired at close range, hit his heart. Forensic experts would later describe this as overkill, a sign of raw, unfiltered rage. In that moment, years of betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak culminated in violence. At 6:13 p.m., Sarah called the police. Her voice, calm and steady, betrayed no hint of panic as she reported what she had done. When officers arrived minutes later, they found her sitting in the living room, the gun resting on the coffee table in front of her. James's body lay in the office, surrounded by the damning evidence of his deceit. The murder sent shockwaves through Emirates Hills, leaving neighbors and friends stunned. The couple who seemed to have everything wealth, love, and success had reached a tragic end. But as the investigation began, it became clear that this was more than just a crime of passion. It was the explosive culmination of years of lies, betrayal, and emotional destruction. And for Sarah, it was only the beginning of the fallout from that fateful day. The police arrived within minutes of Sarah's chilling call. She was found seated calmly in the living room, showing no signs of distress. The gun was on the table, and she made no attempt to resist as officers arrested her. Meanwhile, James' body lay in the home office, surrounded by documents exposing his double life. News of the crime spread rapidly, and Emirates Hills was soon swarmed by media crews. Neighbors described the couple as perfect, struggling to reconcile the brutal act with the image they had of Sarah and James. Investigators began piecing together the scene, uncovering clear signs of premeditation, from the plastic-lined walls to the strategically placed evidence. Sarah's confession shocked the officers. She explained her actions in painstaking detail, leaving no doubt that the crime was deliberate. Her calm demeanor during the initial interrogation only deepened the public fascination with the case. By the next morning, headlines around the world were filled with the story of betrayal, wealth, and murder in one of Dubai's most exclusive neighborhoods. For Sarah, this was just the beginning of a legal and media storm that would follow. Sarah Mitchell was quickly charged with premeditated murder, a serious offense under UAE law. Prosecutors argued that her actions were meticulously planned, pointing to the evidence she had prepared and the plastic sheeting in the office. Her defense team countered with claims of emotional distress, stating that years of betrayal and deception had driven her to act in a moment of psychological collapse. The courtroom was packed as the trial began, with international media closely following every development. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence showing clear intent, while Sarah's lawyers highlighted the trauma she endured from James's infidelity, his secret family, and his financial crimes. Both sides called expert witnesses, from psychologists to financial analysts, to support their narratives. The trial's emotional intensity captivated the public, as every detail of Sarah and James' lives was laid bare. For Sarah, the proceedings were not just about her freedom, but also about reclaiming her story in a world that had judged her so harshly. The verdict would become a defining moment, not just for her, but for all those who had followed the shocking case. As the trial unfolded, the investigation into James's financial activities revealed a far-reaching web of fraud and money laundering. HSBC launched an internal audit, uncovering irregularities tied to his accounts, which triggered regulatory probes across multiple countries. International banking authorities began scrutinizing compliance failures that had allowed James to operate undetected for years. The revelations shook the global financial sector. Authorities in the UK, UAE, and other jurisdictions began tightening regulations, implementing stricter controls on offshore accounts and cross-border transactions. The fallout extended beyond banking, as Dubai's reputation as a financial hub came under intense scrutiny. For Sarah, these developments added another layer to her case. While her actions were being judged in court, James' crimes were being unraveled on a global scale. His polished image as a successful banker crumbled, leaving behind a legacy of deceit and financial scandal. The ripple effects of his actions were just beginning to take shape. The case sparked deep conversations about the challenges of expatriate life in Dubai. It exposed the hidden pressures of maintaining a perfect image in a city where success and appearances are everything. Sarah's story resonated with many, especially women navigating complex relationships and cultural expectations in unfamiliar environments. The revelations about James' polygamous marriage added to the controversy, highlighting the legal and cultural intersections of Western and Emirati norms. Discussions about mental health, betrayal, and the emotional toll of high-pressure lifestyles gained prominence, leading to calls for better support systems for expatriates. Organizations in Dubai responded by creating counseling services and legal resources for expatriates dealing with personal crises. The case became a touchpoint for addressing issues often swept under the rug, offering lessons on the real cost of maintaining appearances in a high-stakes, competitive environment. The trial captivated audiences worldwide, becoming a media sensation. Headlines across major outlets dissected the case, with dramatic titles like Murder in the Mansions and Double Life Exposed in Dubai. Documentaries and news specials delved into every detail, from James' secret family to Sarah's emotional unraveling. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some sympathized with Sarah, viewing her as a victim of unbearable betrayal, while others condemned her actions as calculated and unforgivable. Social media buzzed with debates, turning the case into a global spectacle. The intense coverage highlighted larger societal themes: wealth, power, and deception, leaving the public to question how much of what they admire is just a facade. For Sarah, every detail of her life was now a topic of public discussion, adding another layer of pressure to an already overwhelming situation. The aftermath of the Mitchell case left a lasting mark on Dubai's expatriate and financial communities. Banking institutions overhauled compliance systems, introducing stricter checks to prevent fraud. Social organizations expanded resources for expatriates, focusing on mental health and legal guidance for those facing personal crises. The case also served as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked ambition and deception. It revealed the dangers of living double lives and the toll that maintaining a facade of perfection can take. For many, it became a cautionary tale about trust, betrayal, and the fragility of success. Years later, the Mitchell case remains a symbol of how wealth and privilege can mask deep cracks. It continues to influence financial regulations and expatriate support systems, leaving behind a legacy that extends far beyond the walls of Emirates Hills.